Then I think you can begin.
Yes, we will start. So, okay. Just give me a second. Hello and good morning to all the participants from Paris. And we are really thrilled to have all of you today to discuss long-awaited. So the entire last week, we have been part of the second Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee meeting under the United Nations Environment Assembly here in Paris. So the second meeting was tasked to come up with a zero draft of a legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. So we had a lot happened entire last week, and we will talk about them. We have a pool of wonderful panelists with us with years of experience in the sector. We'll share their experience and what has been their takeaways from this entire event. A couple of housekeeping about announcement before we get on to the agenda. So we'll just divide today's discussion in three broad sections. So in the first part, I'll bring in my colleague Siddharth to make a very small presentation about what was expected from Intergovernmental Negotiating, second Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee meeting. We can call it INC2 meeting. So what was expected from that meeting and what has actually emerged out of the meeting in very brief. And then I will bring in all the panelists one by one. And while I invite them to speak, I will also introduce them to all of you. And we'll be asking few targeted questions, which is very pertinent, very relevant to the sector that they represent. And once they share their experiences, we will open up the floor in the third section where we'll take questions from all the participants, and then we will have them directed to the respective panelists. And I would request all of you to keep posting your question in the chat box or Q&A box, because we'll be taking all the questions in the third session, when basically we're going to open up the floor for questions. And we'll try to spend as much as possible time possible to answer and take as many questions as possible from all of you in today's discussion. So I guess that's it. And Siddharth, the floor is now yours. If you could just take us through the prelude of INC2 and what has emerged out of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Atin, and a special thanks to all the panelists, Satyarupa, Juliet, Swati. We've been in and out of these very 5 days of hectic meetings, and we just wanted to kind of, without any further delay, bring the proceedings of the meeting in as simplistic manner as possible to all of you, so that all of us are aware, because all of us have a very critical role to play when it comes to having a very strong treaty. So I have a very small presentation which will give a background of what has happened so far, and after this presentation we will dive in a conversation with all our esteemed panelists to get a sense of what was happening in the negotiating room and what it actually means for the INCs that are lined up till 2024. So yeah, basically I will give you a sense of what has happened so far. So right from UNIA, what is UNIA, what is INC, how the process basically proceeds, who makes the decisions, and things like that. So the first thing that we need to understand is what exactly is UNIA, because this resolution to end plastic pollution was actually passed in a UNIA meeting. Now we need to understand that UNIA is basically the abbreviated form of United Nations Environment Assembly, and it takes uh, on priority all the pressing environmental issues of our time. um, so basically, there are 193 member states, including India and most of the African states who are a part of UNIA. And these member states meet every 2 years to discuss various issues like pollution, like chemicals, like plastics, science, and basically, what is discussed in these UNIA meetings becomes a mandate for the United Nations Environment Program to take it up and then bring together the member states and start discussions around what was decided in the UNIA meeting. So, since its inception in 2012, which was after a 30-year long deliberations, we finally decided that we should have an environmental assembly where all the pressing environmental issues are discussed, and all the member states basically come up with instruments to on how to deal with these pressing issues. So the first meeting of UNIA happened in 2012, and since its inception, UNIA has met 5 times. Um, when the issue of plastic pollution actually was raised in the first UNIA meeting, in fact, from first to fourth UNIA meeting, most of the discussion that was happening revolved around the issue of marine litter and also microplastics. Uh, but it was only after the third United Nations Environment Assembly meeting that an open-ended expert group was formed, and the expert group was actually asked to report back on where do we stand in the issue of plastic pollution, and the expert group came back with a finding that this issue is very pertinent in almost every part of the globe, and it also needs special attention in terms of maybe a global legislation, a legally binding instrument which will have some obligations on all the member states. It was finally in UNIA 5.2, which was in 2021, that we actually adopted a resolution which is called 5/14, and the title of the resolution was to end plastic pollution, um, which included the entire life cycle of plastic. So right from extraction till its disposal, and this was the first time that the UNIA discussion um, actually started to talk about the entire life cycle and not just marine litter or microplastics. So that's how the evolution of UNIA happened, and finally, what we are now discussing is Resolution 5.14, all 5/14, and all the member states are basically trying to kind of negotiate and arrive at an instrument which is acceptable for all the member states. Now, how does all of this happen? So the resolution that I was talking about in the earlier slide uh, gave a mandate to create an intergovernmental negotiating committee. Now, Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, or INC, is nothing but it's a committee made out of all the member states of Union, right? And they basically come together and discuss on various issues based on various documents that are prepared by the INC Secretariat. And what is very important to understand here is that the committee or the decisions that are taken in the committee are strictly member state led process, which means that only countries can take decisions. The decision maker in the entire process is only member states or countries, right? um, UNEP cannot take any decisions, or any UN body for that matter cannot take any decisions. um, Major stakeholders or NGOs do have a say, but the decision eventually is that of countries and member states. So it this entire process of negotiation, which starts with the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, is a strictly member state led process, and the countries are the one who are actually making decisions and negotiating on the various aspects of documents that are put forth on the table for negotiations. Now, when this committee was formed, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, so far it has met twice. So the second meeting ended yesterday. The first meeting of the committee was held in Punta del Este in Uruguay, and the second meeting happened in Paris. Now, between the first and the second meeting, what the Secretariat did is it invited written submissions from all the member states on how do they actually look at what a strong treaty, what a strong global plastic treaty should actually look like. And of all the member states, close to 67 countries that you see here in blue color on the world map. These are the countries that actually made submissions to the Secretariat. And based on the submissions of these countries, the Secretariat actually prepared a paper which was called the Potential Options for Elements. So basically, um, the Potential Options for Elements paper is what was negotiated in the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, right? So countries could actually decide on what should the objective of the treaty be, what should the core obligations be, what should be the implementation measures, uh, should we have national action plans? If so, then what the template should be? Should it be a common template across the board for every member state, or every country has the liberty to kind of put forth their own template? So all major minor issues are basically discussed at the negotiating table. And in INC2, the expectation from both the Secretariat and from major groups and stakeholders, including civil society organizations like us, was that INC2 will actually be able to arrive at a zero draft. Now, a zero draft is basically it's the first it's basically the first set of rules that would be put forth again for negotiations by the member states. Now, the timeline is such that the committee, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, will be meeting 5 times till 2024. And then, that is when we finally expect to have the final treaty, which can be opened for ratification by all the member states. So very quickly, what actually happened in INC2? So basically, the the timetable that was put forth by the Secretariat was such that the first day, that is Monday, last Monday, would be spent in plenary, where we will talk about rules of procedure, and other procedural issues. 3 days, that is Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, was dedicated to discuss the options paper that the UNEP had put forth based on the member states' submissions. And the last day again was, as per the timetable, was again coming back to the plenary and then deliberating on what different member states, where are the objections that they have taken, are they making fresh suggestions to the options paper that was put forth by UNEP. However, what actually panned out in the meeting was almost 2 days were spent discussing provisional rules of procedure. Right. This basically is definitely it's important. It's not that it's not, but in the provisional rules of procedure as well, there were two rules, that is Rule 37 and Rule 38, that were very fiercely kind of objected by a set of countries, right? And what these rules actually talk about is voting or consensus. So how will decisions be made? That is what these two rules talk about. Um, if all the countries kind of agree to a certain decision, then basically that's consensus. And if there is no consensus in the room, then do we move to a voting based decision making system? Is something that almost took 2 days for us to kind of sort out. But I would say that this issue has not really been sorted out in the INC2. It will definitely come up uh, back again in INC3 when we are actually discussing rules of procedure, because the agenda of every INC meeting does have a mention of discussing the provisional rules of procedure. So the status for this consensus versus voting debate is not yet final. The decision has not been made, but some text has been bracketed already, and the final decision for this on how decisions will be made in the committee will only be probably made in INC 3. The options paper that was supposed to be discussed for good 3 days with almost, if I'm not wrong, 9 to 10 different sessions of contact groups, actually had 1 day for discussion. So the substance, what will the treaty kind of entail? How will the implementation happen? Will there be technology transfer, and how? All of that was actually just discussed in one single day, right? Um, so apart from that, there is a high ambition coalition which Juliet will definitely talk about. So high ambition coalition countries are basically the ones who are actually demanding a very strong treaty, and this high ambition coalition is also identified by the INC Secretariat, and high ambition coalition has also made written submissions on how they kind of believe a strong treaty should actually look like. But what we saw in INC2 is that apart from the high ambition coalition, there's also a group of countries who have time and again emphasized that plastic is not really a problem, but plastic waste is a problem, plastic littering is a problem, and our focus has to be on strictly on waste management or downstream measures. And these countries basically are demanding exactly opposite of what the high ambition coalition has been demanding for since the inception of this entire committee. And it's good to be optimistic, but let's face it that the likelihood of having a very strong legally binding instrument as an outcome of the 5 INC meetings that are planned over a course of almost 2 years is much more difficult than we had imagined it. It is not going to be a cakewalk, not for the civil society organizations. It's not going to be easy for member states, because there are a lot of different countries who have different kinds of national interests. They have economic interests, and some of them are definitely placing their economic interests much above their environmental interests, and also the human health of their own people. So I think I will stop here, and then I when we dive deep into the questions, I think you'll get a lot more clarity. But before that, I just want to say that whatever I've talked about here uh, is covered in a briefing paper that we've released. So if you are interested in what the process is, how did it evolve over the last couple of years, this briefing paper is a small note of what has happened so far. And INC2 updates our speakers will definitely talk about. And we are also doing a press release later in the day. So you might want to watch out for that. So that's it from my side. I hope I have not overshot my time. And we can just start. Atin, over to you.
Yeah.
Let me know how do you want to move ahead.
No problem. Thank you so much, Siddharth. It was really insightful, and we got an overview of what was expected and what really emerged from INC2. So let me now bring in the first panelist in the discussion. So our first panelist is Juliet Cabrera. But before I invite her to answer questions, Siddharth, if you could introduce Juliet to all the participants.
Yeah. So, welcome, Ms. Juliet. Ms. Juliet Cabrera is the Director General of Rwanda Environmental Management Authority, to which she was appointed in May 2020. Prior to her appointment, she held the position of Director General of Environment and Climate Change at the Ministry of Environment. Juliet began her career as an environment management officer at a time when Rwanda was developing much of its forward-looking environmental institutions and policies and enforcement of different laws, such as the 2008 banning of plastic bags in Rwanda and the 2019 law banning single-use plastics. Juliet currently serves as the chair of executive committee of the multilateral fund of the Montreal Protocol in the year 2019-20. And Juliet Cabrera graduated with a Bachelor of Science with a major in biochemistry from Makerere University, Kampala in March 2002. She graduated in Masters of Public Health at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in June 2020, and a Master's in Conservation MBA at the African Leadership University. Just to add to that, Juliet is also a part of the High Ambition Coalition. She's like Rwanda is leading the High Ambition Coalition alongside Norway. And apart from that, Juliet also is elected as a bureau member by the African states to put forth their concerns to the Secretariat.
Thank you so much, Siddharth, and congratulations, Juliet, once more. I mean, probably we couldn't have a better representative from the African region to the INC Bureau. And thank you so much for coming on board today. I know it has been very hectic for you, and you just traveled day before yesterday, and you have probably just arrived Kigali, and then you are here. Thank you so much. So I have two questions for you. I'll just ask the first question and take your answer, and then we can get to the second question. For the participants, if you have any question based on the discussion that Julius is about to have, please keep posting them in either Q&A box or the chat box, so that at the end of the discussion we can further ask them to Juliet to kind of respond the questions. So Juliet, my first question to you is, Africa has emerged as one of the most progressive region. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Both as per the written submissions as well as per the interventions made by Uganda on behalf of the African group, Eswatini and Rwanda in the plenary and the contact groups. So did INC2 meet your expectations as a bureau member of the African region to the Secretariat?
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to join you today in this media briefing. First of all, allow me to congratulate the organizers of this media briefing session. It's very, very important that we keep our media team very much in sync or plugged into what is discussed in these boardrooms. It doesn't serve us well as negotiators to keep all the information to ourselves, because we are not the experts in disseminating this information to our communities, which is the ultimate reason as to why we go through the many hours of negotiating that we go through. So back to your question on whether Inc. 2 reached my expectations. The answer is no. It will be a blunt no. We went with a lot of expectations. We thought we would end Inc. 2 with a draft 0 treaty. This is not what we ended up with, but I'm also not very discouraged, because the closing of the session yesterday at least gave the mandate of the chair, the Inc. chair, and the secretariat to be able to use the the information that we have, the submissions that you talked about, more submissions that are going to be sent in the course of between now and Inc. 3. Apologies if you hear any background noise. I'm in my house, and it is a boy's house, so sometimes the voices tend to be louder than they should be. Anyway, so the positive side of it is we are not stuck. We didn't get the 0 draft, but we have the mandate to get it from the resources that we have, and from the very active engagements, interventions that we had in the week. So the open-ended session that has been allowed to take place back to back with Inc. 3 is going to exactly lead us to where, yes, we were supposed to be yesterday. We shall be a couple of months late, but I hope it is for the good. The reason we delayed, Sadat presented that very eloquently, and I don't want to go back to it, but there was a lot of back and forth on rules of procedures. And at some point, as a bureau member, I was, for lack of a better word, frustrated. Why doesn't the chair just move on? We need to move on. But the room that he gave the member states to express their views was also very important, because at the end of the day, what we are interested in is consensus. We are interested in a treaty where everyone is equally involved, takes it as equally important as the other. So the room to express member states' opinions was very important, and hopefully we are going to build on that. It was trust building. We built the trust around, yes, we don't have the rules of procedure approved upon, they're still draft, but we trust that we are using them provisionally for the better, and they're going to be worked on gradually as we go to where we are supposed to be ending. It's a long answer to your question. We were not satisfied, but we are not stuck. We have a path forward.
Yeah, wonderful. So the second question is specific to Rwanda, because Rwanda is leading the High Ambition Coalition alongside Norway, as Siddharth has already mentioned. So the High Ambition Coalition has set ambitious goals like restrictions of plastic production and consumption to sustainable levels, right? However, these were not accepted by several oil and gas majors to kind of put a cap on polymer production or extraction. So do you find that problematic, and if so, why? And do you also think we should still be expecting an ambitious treaty if we do not keep provisions for reduction in the production or consumptions?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we should keep expecting an ambitious treaty on condition that we have restrictions on the production of primarily plastic polymers. And the ambitious treaty can only be achieved if we are looking at plastic pollution throughout the life cycle of the plastic. We can't deceive ourselves that we are going to look at the downstream, the waste management, and forget the production level. So if we here, let me give you an example from my country. Now, Rwanda, not as the High Ambition Coalition this time, but putting on the heart of Rwanda, we don't produce any of these primary polymers. We have banned the use of single-use plastics, but it is a constant struggle with us during the enforcement because the plastics are very cheap. Or they are free of charge. I think they are free of charge because if they had a cost to it, we wouldn't find them all over. It wouldn't be as tempting as it is. So they are cheap because the production is not restricted. The production is not restrained in any way. So that's where we are supposed to start from. Make it hard for these products to come their way to the market at a zero cost. At least put a cost to this because eventually they cost the environment, they cost the human health. So if we put a cost to it, that would be a good place to start. And then if we put a target on how much you're going to be producing when, what you're going to be reducing gradually, and hopefully eventually end up with phasing down the plastics, the primary plastic polymers that are produced, we know we cannot live without these products. They are used in many places, in cars, in IT equipment. It's okay, let them stay there in the valuable commodities, but not in the carry bags, which are blown away by the wind just because they are very rampant on the market. So if we can start with that, and then the second step, if we can design the products in a way that these products can be recycled. For instance, the IT equipment that I'm talking about, the car parts, or name it, if these are designed in a way that they are easily recycled, that is another step that we can check plastic pollution. And then finally, the waste that we generate as the last option, it should be very minimal at the downstream. So when we have the waste then, which has been considerably reduced, then we can talk about recycling, because all research work shows that only around 10% of the waste that is generated can be recycled. So the treaty doesn't want to be naive to say that we're going to put our efforts in waste management. It wouldn't serve the purpose. So the countries that are still have reservations around the production of the primary polymers, yes, they have something in common, like you just laid out. They are oil-producing countries. They are countries with economies in transition, very legitimate reasons. But again, also ending plastic pollution is very legitimate. It is long overdue. It is pushing the problem to even other countries that do not cause the problem in the first place. Yeah. So we might have some back and forth, but this is why we need the treaty that will be able to cater for even these concerns of these countries, because we are not here to push the country's economies to be affected. We are here to see how we can have both, how we can have a gradual shift from the dependence on fossil fuel to a cleaner fuel production, and therefore alternatives to plastics. This is another way to look at how do we build an economy that is sustainable, that is green, that has a human face on what we are doing. Let's not only count the rupees or the dollars. Let's count the health of our children, of our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Please stay with us. I'll come back to you with questions from the participant. Let me now bring in the next panelist, Satyarupa Sekhar. Siddharth, would you please introduce Satyarupa to the participants?
Yes, absolutely. So Satyarupa Sekhar is Asia Pacific Coordinator for Break Free for Plastics. Satyarupa provides overall leadership and coordination in the Asia Pacific region for the development of holistic and inclusive strategies to dramatically reduce plastic production, pollution, and usage. She works with and supports frontline communities and organizations, leaders in their working to promote sustainable, effective, and locally driven initiatives. Prior to joining Break Free from Plastics, Satyarupa has worked with policy research and advocacy groups to make visible communities and issues that remain invisible and neglected by governments and general public. She has worked in Chennai's city government and a Tamil Nadu state department to improve their data management practices to plan civic infrastructure better, institute zero waste systems, and single use plastic ban, and has supported the creation of data that has been used by the city government and courts to provide evidence for failures in service provisions. Satyarupa holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Hyderabad and a European Masters in Law and Economics degree. So welcome Satyarupa, and over to you, Atin.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. So Satyarupa, welcome. My first question to you is on the Southeast Asian region. So the Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia have either not commented on or are not in favor of phasing out or reducing the supply of primary plastic polymers. So how do you look at these countries' positions, and is it a red flag according to you?
Thanks, Atin, and thank you, Siddharth. First of all, for organizing this session. I echo Juliet's thoughts that it's very, very important for us to actually talk to the media and to share what's been happening here, because first of all, the access was limited. So there was very limited meaningful participation of a lot of impacted communities, indigenous people, youth, children, just people just couldn't get into the venue, even despite registry, visas and all of those problems. So I definitely think that this is very important for us to talk to the media and to share, those of us who were able to gain access to some of those conversations, to share it back so that we can, have more public awareness and shape the public discourse in our countries. Atin, just to respond to the question that you asked, I think we did see that maybe many of these countries did not take the floor in the plenary discussions and in the contact groups. However, if we look at some of the submissions that they made ahead of INC2, we do see that there is some indication of ambition among Southeast Asian countries. So, for example, when we look at what countries are saying on elimination of polymer production, we actually see that Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia actually do support some amount of restriction on polymer production. We do see Thailand has referenced the need for this. But at the same time, I think maybe just looking at this alone might not be as useful. It might be more insightful to combine it with a few other things that they have called for in their submission. So, for example, we actually see that when we're looking at mandatory requirements for on chemicals, we actually see that Thailand and the Philippines actually are calling for this, and Indonesia is making a reference to this. Similarly, with harmonized product design, we're actually seeing that Malaysia, Philippines are actually strongly calling for this. In terms of maybe extraction of raw materials, not so much. We're not seeing that much ambition from the Southeast Asian countries, but reporting on what's going on in the full life cycle of plastic. We're seeing Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines again having a very strong demand, and Malaysia and Papua New Guinea also making some reference to this. So I think overall we see that the Southeast Asian countries have balanced out the need for making some progress on the environmental aspects and impacts that plastic production and plastic pollution has been having on their countries. But at the same time, I think being very cognizant of the fact that many of their economies actually depend on not just on upstream production, but on downstream, on recycling. All of these countries actually have a large, pretty well developed, however informal, recycling sectors. And a large part of their population is actually dependent on those livelihoods. And, informal livelihoods really means that it's really the poorest of the poor that are really getting into that sector, right? So I think they're being very cautious, but at the same time, actually demonstrating some very interesting ambition. So for example, yesterday, Malaysia took the floor asking for product redesign. So, just moving from downstream waste management to the midstream, where they're calling for product redesign and reuse systems. I think they're prioritizing the right thing given their particular context. However, it's just Inc. 2. We're seeing that hopefully, between Inc. 2 and Inc. 3, some of the intersectional work, we should be able to work with some of the Southeast Asian countries to move further, at least to the midstream, if not upstream.
Well, that was really, really interesting. Okay, my second question to you is, the countries in the Asia Pacific region are actually struggling to manage problematic plastics like sachet. So does the UNEP option paper adequately cover the issue of, say, unnecessary or avoidable or the problematic plastics? And what phraseology, according to you, may cover or address the issue of the multi-layered plastic like sachet?
So the options paper actually has 3 core obligations when it comes to phase down or phase out. We're talking about primary plastic polymers, we're talking about problematic and avoidable plastic production, and then we're talking about chemicals and other additives. And I think these 3, by themselves may allow companies to continue to use sachets. And just for the audience that are with us, sachets, what we are referring to sachets are mostly, sealed flexible pouches that are usually designed for single use. And across Asia, and I'm sure in Africa as well, you get everything from soap, shampoo, toothpaste, to oil, ketchup, sauce, various kinds of condiments, but also, chips and cereal, just things that are not necessarily in the single serve. I mean, they're designed for single serve, but they're not necessarily just a small, few grams. And so these are very, prevalent across the region. And they have been extremely problematic because they are very hard to collect. They fragment very quickly, and there is nothing really you can do about it. And this is by admission of companies like Unilever and Nestle that actually use sachets as a product packaging format for many, if not all, of their products. Unilever's failed chemical recycling project in Indonesia is actually testimony to the fact that we need to phase out sachets as a problematic format. So I think the UNEP options paper allows us to start negotiating for this to be listed as one of the most problematic packaging formats. However, I think we are seeing intense lobbying from FMCGs, from business interests, including the business coalition that's been influencing all of our delegations. I have to mention that yesterday there was a tweet, somebody analyzed the observers who were able to gain access. Out of 400, or I think 390 observers, I think 190 were industry lobbyists. This is more than 50% of the non-member states, right? So we're not talking about the member states. Everybody else, 190 industry lobbyists are present in these conversations. I think this is an extremely serious conflict of interest that we must highlight. There are, I think, I'm not sure, Atin or Siddharth, you mentioned countries that have, oil-producing interests. We do know that member states, the delegations included industry representatives. So, there is very intense lobbying. I think we still have a chance to talk about how we can phase out not just the packaging, but the format, but also use the fact that chemicals and additives are toxic and hazardous. I don't think many people are now debating or discussing whether or not they're hazardous. It's really about whether we can make sure that they are in that blacklist of chemicals that need to be immediately banned or eliminated. So I think this is going to be. I'm hopeful that sachets might not be that difficult for us to win. That would be a pretty easy one to win. Also, just calling on Unilever and Nestle's, Inc. 1 plenary statements where they called out sachets. They admitted the sachets are the most problematic for them. So I'm hoping that this should not be much of a point of discussion in industry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Satyarupa. Please stay with us for more questions from the participants. Let me now bring in Swati Seshadri, our last panelist for the day. But before I come back to Swati with my questions, Sid, would you please introduce Swati to all the participants?
Yeah. Swati Seshadri has worked in a range of civil society organizations as a researcher and in leadership roles since the late 1990s. She currently works at the Center for Financial Accountability as Director of Oil and Gas. The team tracks investments and impacts of the plastics value chain from extraction, import, transportation to processing and petrochemical production and post-management issues. The petrochemical sector has been a particular focus of Swati's work for the past few years. Welcome, Swati, and Atin, over to you.
Thank you, Siddharth. Swati, so my first question to you is, most of the oil or gas and polymer majors like Iran, Saudi Arabia, China, Brazil, and even India have expressed that they do not agree to the reduction in production of raw materials and plastic itself. This clearly means that these countries are not looking upstream to solve the plastic pollution crisis. So what strategies, according to you, can be used by the High Ambition Coalition to get these countries back on the negotiating table to discuss on this agenda?
Thanks, Satin. Thanks, Siddharth, for organizing this and inviting us also to speak. Getting to the question directly, I think there's a joke that we've been kind of laughing about in the past week, is that we have a very different BRICS formation, in this in this treaty, where South Africa unfortunately got replaced with Saudi Arabia, and this BRICS is the one which is opposing any significant upstream measures. And I think why we have to remember that out of this BRICS, it's Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Brazil, which are oil extracting countries. See, I call them companies. They are companies only. Countries, and you have, of course, China, India, and the rest also, processing for petrochemicals. So, I think if there was any if we thought that they would at least offer lip service to upstream measures, they made it very clear that they're not interested in it. So, in a sense, I like that what you see is what you get with them. I like that they have put out their cards and they're very clear. So then it's becomes an easier, not easier, but at least clearer, conversation with them. I think what's needed in terms, whether it's High Ambition Coalition or even individual countries, I think there needs to be, there need to be bilateral conversations and negotiations. I think there's no two ways, about that. And in the era of sanctions, while we have found ways of scuttling sanctions, yet sanctions are, I won't say that I wish we didn't have sanctions, is what I would like to say. But in the absence of clear conscience of the governments, sanctions becomes a choice one does not have, but to apply to countries. So I think bilateral conversations of the HAC countries, even non-HAC countries who are progressive, I think is important. But also let us remember, HAC has UAE in it. The United Arab Emirates is a member of the High Ambition Coalition. So what is an oil producing major doing in a High Ambition Coalition when every submission of theirs had nothing to do with the High Ambition Coalition statements? So if you look at the UAE statements and then you look at the HAC statements, they had nothing to do with each other, right? So I keep thinking they're the spy over there, but we know they don't need to be a part of a coalition to be spies. They'll anyway get their information. So, I am very hopeful with the existence of the High Ambition Coalition. However, I wouldn't peg everything onto HAC. I think we would be putting too many eggs in one basket, which is never a good idea. So yeah, it needs to be bilateral conversations between countries, and possibly what we've seen in other, and Ms. Juliet will be able to, say more about this, but what I've heard about in other MEAs is that, you just ignore them. I know, unfortunately, that India was ignored in Minamata. and they were completely sidelined because of the positions they were taking, while the rest of the world was taking different positions. And perhaps while voting was not agreed on, this is another kind of voting where you just ignore that country which is not falling in line. So I think those kinds of strategies will need to be adopted, and I can see some of that already happening, because I think high ambition coalition countries in the negotiations have been continuously hammering on what their positions are, and I think that's just the only way to do it. Unfortunately, the dramatics of it win, because we were just looking at, even in the example of consensus voting, we were looking at the number of countries for consensus and number of countries for voting. The number of countries for voting actually outnumber the countries for consensus. But the ones who are asking for consensus are, they're actually doing drama on, I'm sorry, Ms. Juliet, because you are, a country representative, but some of them were just, there was so much of theatrics, and that somehow gets the attention of the chair, gets the attention of the house. People then want to pacify, so it seems like a lover's tiff at times, going on, in the negotiations, if I could use that metaphor. So I think we're going to have to also the countries will also have to put their foot down and say, we're not going to fall for theatrics, and we will not fall for drama, and let's look at the content and not the optics of it. So I think multiple such strategies, from bilateral negotiations to saying, no, we stick by what we're saying in the floor, and just let those numbers keep counting and adding up, and not fall for the drama of those few, maybe 10 countries out of 170 or 60 or whatever, yeah. So that's just one part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm basically, you have answered part of my next question, and this question can also be answered by all the panelists, and I'd be really interested to kind of know what your thoughts are. We spent about half of the entire INC2 to deliberate on this Rule 37 and 38, which Siddharth had also pointed out. So, while this issue has been suspended for discussions in the next INC, honestly, if you expect 193 UN member countries to agree on a certain agenda before the agenda is adopted unanimously, and it's getting reflected in a legally binding instrument going forward, we have all of us have been looking for any precedents in the past where such thing might have happened, and the other agenda which is very closely associated, that probably at the onset, the objective of arriving at a legally binding instrument got a hit. And do you also believe that this agenda raised by, in fact, the first point of order was raised by India to bracket Rule 37 and 38.1. So do you think that it is going to affect the intensity of the legally binding instrument to an extent? And after Swati response, I would also request Satyarupa and Juliet to respond quickly if you guys want.
Yeah, so just for the benefit of those who are hearing in this very famous 37 and 38.1, to give it a little background, is about, I'm saying it very simplistically. It started basically during the 514 conversation, during the UNIA 5.2 conversation. No, at the open-ended working group, where, for example, the question of European Union and what about their vote? Will the European Union put one vote, or will the countries put separate votes? So that was a very limited kind of a non-resolved issue, which in INC1 kind of blew out of proportion, where it became about whether it's going to be voting or consensus. So this was actually not the original issue. It was about whether EU votes as one single unit, or the member countries of EU will vote separately. Became a big, the oil majors used that opportunity to make it, a voting versus consensus issue. So that's just for everyone's benefit. And 38.1 specifically talks of, it will, negotiations will be held on consensus, and should a consensus not be achieved, then there would be a 2/3 voting that would be, conducted. I mean, a voting conducted with where the two-third wins. Now, India, there was a question in the thing, about what was India's position, and I'll club that with my response to you, Atin, is that India didn't really turn up physically at INC 1. They only joined online, and while we've we've attended as much as we could. From what I remember, India made only 2 interventions. One was just some thanking everyone, and the second one was on the last day, where they said that it should be consensus and not voting. And while they didn't, in my memory, and I can look back at our notes, they didn't say it should be bracketed in as many words. But today, it's amazing how much of gaslighting, or whatever one wants to call it these days, happens, because India suddenly came in and said, we said bracket it. They didn't say the word bracketed, in INC 1, from what I remember. I can go back and check. So the thing is that India has taken an extremely regressive position, and embarrassingly so. The thing about consensus versus voting, I think they're only postponing a time, and some kind of a blow up. They postponed it from INC 1 to INC 2, where they said they will provisionally adopt, the rules of procedure. This time they said they will adopt it, except, and remember that, this was contested. So they're only postponing it. But what I see hopeful is that the rest of the world has pushed back on these 10 countries massively. So I don't think they are going to so quickly get their consensus. For viewers like us, or observers like us, it could be frustrating. It could be sometimes even demoralizing. But for me, actually, at the end of the day, I was also very depressed, at the end of that first day. But I feel that it actually is a good sign. It's a good sign at 2 levels. One is that the oil majors are desperate. They're desperate because here is, after UNFCCC, here is another, treaty which is going to put an end to fossil fuels. UNFCCC is not putting an end to it, we know, but an attempt. And in this attempt, at least until now, it's been very strong that, that majority of the countries want a very solid treaty. So that desperation is visible, which is good, which means that they've been made uncomfortable and they've been pushed against the wall. So that's one, one encouragement. And the other is the extent of pushback, that we saw. It is still from the West, from the developed world. It is still not so much from, the rest, but it's still encouraging, is what, I feel. And therefore, I feel that without doing a voting, there will end up being a voting, because the majority voice will just hopefully drown out the minority voice, and it'll become like a referendum, maybe, rather than a voting, which is also not bad, as long as we get what we want. That would be, they are desperate. They are very desperate.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I have much more to say, but I'll also, have the others also respond.
Right. We are slightly short of time, but as I requested all the panelists, and I'm requesting all the participants, we may have to extend it by some 10-15 minutes. So we thought of doing it in 1 hour event. So we started exactly at 8:30. It's 9:30 now, local time. I think it's kind of 1 o'clock India time. So I would request Satyarupa to kind of respond very quickly on this voting versus consensus saga. Satyarupa.
I think I would just leave it at what Swati said, which is it's obvious where the interests lie. And that I think we really need the member states to remember that this is a treaty that's to discuss environmental and human health, and not to discuss the continuation of plastics or of fossil fuels. So I think we'll have to only keep reminding our member states that this is basically what we're here to discuss. We are not here to discuss all of the techno fixes. I can see there are lots of questions about, recycling, how much, what about bans, what about materials? I think if we stay clear about what our objective is, we should get the treaty we need.
Right. Thank you. Siddharth, I think we can now open up the floor for questions from the participants because Juliet has many other commitments later in the day. So we have to let her go. So over to you if you could just moderate the questions and direct them to the respective panelists. Over to you, Sid.
So thank you so much, Atin. So I'm just to be sure, we will not be able to take all the questions on this call, but we'll try to pick some of them, and then the ones that we are not able to answer on this call, we will definitely get back to you. So my first question is any number on how many countries have banned single-use plastic like India? Do we have any data on that? And is that enough to do that? That is something that I'm adding from my side, that single-use plastic bans having policies is one end of the discussion. But does just having a single-use plastic ban embedded in our legislation, is that good enough? So, any of, in fact, I would if Ms. Juliet can take that up, and because Rwanda is definitely leading as far as bans are concerned. In fact, Rwanda and Tanzania happen to be two countries in Eastern African region where I have seen a ban in policy and in place. So, Ms. Juliet, if you could kind of comment on that.
Thank you so much for the question. First of all, I enjoyed the discussions from the previous speakers. Observers are a great addition to what we are doing, and I really love the sense of ambition and urgency that you're putting into the whole process. We have great share materials here on this platform. We will continue reaching out to see how to strategize better. It's not, we don't have a one approach strategy. We have to have multiple of them, but not getting stuck into consensus. I've not seen consensus in environment diplomacy. I don't think we are going to get it in IMC process. So back to the question of is the ban laws that ban single-use plastics enough? It's only the first step in the right direction. It's not enough at all, because you are now dealing with consumption. You're not dealing with production. That cannot help you to sustain the desires of that ban that you're trying to implement. Implementation also becomes a very rigorous process. So I know some few countries that have banned the use of single-use plastics, but because these materials are still flooding the markets, like a lot of them, it outweighs the interest or the intention of the laws to have no leakage. So again, we have to have a treaty that beats the leakage at all life cycle, but start production of the primary polymers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Juliet. There's one more question that probably I have so many questions that it'll take a lot more time. But I think Satyarupa, I want to direct this to you, is about why are we actually concerned about this voting versus consensus debate? And also, has there been precedence in earlier multilateral environmental agreements where, having a provision for voting has actually made a certain MEA stronger and has resulted in a stronger treaty or instrument for that matter.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yes, voting is very much a part of many multilateral negotiations and agreements. And I think maybe Juliet is probably the best place to tell us how that has gone. I think it would be a very dangerous precedent if the INC processes switch to consensus. What we are seeing and what we heard from Swati say is that there are extremely strong lobbying efforts that are very, very obvious by, for example, the BRICS countries, of course, but then also West Asia, right? I know Swati said that South Africa in the BRICS, we've replaced South Africa with Saudi Arabia, but there are lots of other countries in West Asia that have similar interests that are going to be supporting the BRICS in making sure that we do not get the ambitious treaty that we want. So I think consensus is, and I want to paraphrase, I think maybe, or even just try to say what the representative of Senegal said. Consensus is going to undermine democracy. And this is basically, I think, one of the most powerful statements that we heard when there was the conversation going on about voting versus consensus, is that by using consensus as a way to make a decision, we are basically allowing certain interests to hold everybody else and the treaty we want to ransom. You know, unless everybody agrees on everything, we cannot move forward, right? And so that means we need just one country or one member state to say, I do not agree, and that's it. Everything gets stalled. So in this context, I think you know, we need to go in for voting, and I think that there is precedence for voting, and I think that is why we need to keep the pressure on to ensure that it doesn't go into consensus and that it stays true to voting.
To build on what you're saying, yes, just to keep it a conversation, to build on what my sister is saying, we cannot be held hostages by just a few member states. 10, we were counting. The High Ambition Coalition platform was counting. Who is that is not interested in voting? And why do we describe democracy as in one direct? When it suits us, we are for it. If it doesn't work for us, we want consensus. So that's not where we are ready to. We are not ready to settle for that as the African group negotiators. We are not ready to settle for that as the High Ambition Coalition. We must have a provision on voting. Otherwise, we are not going to move forward. And it's not edging anyone out, but it's just saying this problem is too big and we have to move on. We shall not wait for everyone to be at the same level of understanding or level of implementing, but we need to move on. And that is why this option of voting is going to be very, very handy as we move on. We're not going to drop this, at least from the government's perspective. We are ready to push on with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Juliet, for your insight. My last question would be to Swati, and then probably I'll hand it over to Atin. And extremely sorry to all the participants, but all your questions have been recorded, and we will make it a point that when we are back in India, we will respond to all of these questions, and we will pass them on to you. Satyarupa, you have something to add to that?
Sorry, I didn't. I meant to put my hand down, and respond in chat. Oh. I see there was a question on just transition, and I wanted to answer it, but I'll answer Arshad on chat. No problem.
Please go ahead, Satyarupa. Please, I think just transition is a very important issue, and you should please go ahead and talk about it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to preempt your question.
No, it's very relevant, Satyarupa. It's very relevant, and please also explain what just transition means to all the participants before you get into the technicalities. But it's very pertinent question, and I think we still have about 5 minutes of scheduled time because we agreed to do it a 1 hour 15-minute session, and right. Depending on the questions, like we can explore whether Siddharth and I can take a couple of more. Yeah.
Right. I think maybe Harshad would be best placed to also answer just what is just transition. What we are saying is that at any time when we're demanding that our economies or economic means of production and consumption move from a current system to a different system, there are going to be people and costs that will have to be thought of as we move. There are people whose livelihoods depend on this. And I think in the case of plastics and plastic production as well as pollution, the conversations around this, we do need to realize that or recognize the work that informal waste pickers have done in addressing plastic pollution all these years. It hasn't been enough, but I think the point has been that plastic as a material is really very, very difficult to manage. It has so many formats, it has so many chemicals. Sometimes we don't even recognize all of the things that have plastic. So as we transition, what we want is that not only that the outcome of the transition is just, but the process by which we get there is just. And I think in this conversation, we need to very much, center waste pickers and workers across the entire plastic supply chain. The phrase that we're now using in the Break Free from Plastic movement is the plastic death cycle, because basically plastic just harms from the time of production to use to consumption and disposal. In terms of, I think, just transition, and I can see that Juliet's raised her hand, we're seeing incredible leadership coming from the African region. African countries are supporting unequivocally the need for the treaty to include several provisions on just transition of waste pickers. There is the Just Transitions Initiative that Kenya and South Africa have created, and Brazil joined this time. And I think overall we're seeing that it has been slow, but I think there is promising. But I will leave it to Juliet to answer more.
Juliet, please, your bit. We are eager to hear your bit.
Yeah. Many thanks for the question. Just transition is going to be a very big area of discussion. We need to define it in a way that is agreeable to all member states. From the lens of the African countries, we are looking at just transition as, the informal waste collectors, pickers who are not protected, who are paid the least, yet they are doing a great job of preventing further leakage of the plastics. But in the different meetings and informal meetings that I've been in, both at Inc. 1 and Inc. 2, just transition is also being described as a way of supporting industries to shift. If India, for example, allow me to pick on India, if India has a huge plastic industry, and we are talking about shifting to non-plastic products, India can define just transition as the need to fund that shift in industry of that industry sector. Now that might be hard, especially from the developing countries' perspective. And what I've been telling people, we don't have the right definition yet. Everyone is trying to define it from their angle of interest, but we need to be realistic. This might not necessarily be the same definition as it is in the Paris Agreement. We want to avoid defining just transition the way it is defined in the Paris Agreement. We want to have one that is responding to the actual problem here on plastic waste, plastic pollution. So Africa is staging the garbage collectors that are not protected, but we are also staging the infant stage of our waste management systems. If it's going to be a legally binding treaty and we are supposed to make periodic reports, baselines, conducted every year or every other 2 years, I don't know what period we're going to agree upon. Again, just transition in this perspective will mean that countries need to be supported to develop these MRV systems so we can be able to track and report on the progress that is being made in that perspective. So I just wanted to add that just transition is very, very important, but it's very important again that we define it the way it must be defined, so that it does not bring another hurdle in the negotiations. We are pushing for a multilateral fund under this treaty. But what is that fund going to be funding exactly? Is this part and parcel of it, or are we looking at other sources of funds to come to this into this aspect? Is it from other concessional finances or any other sources of funds like in banks? I don't know. Yeah, so just to add that we need to be super, super careful in defining and understanding what just transition means in the perspective of this treaty. Thank you.
Over to you, Sid.
Thank you so much, Ms. Juliet. Now I'm moving to Swati, and Swati, there's also something very interesting. It's kind of a concept which I want you to introduce our participants to. It's called conflicts of interest. And like Satyarupa mentioned, that of the odd 400 observers, half of them were from the industry. So, and we do have very limited time as observers to, kind of make our statements heard in this huge gathering. So, can you just explain what conflicts of interest are, and like how do the dynamics kind of work in such an arrangement?
Yep, I think this is an extremely important and often not discussed enough issue, because there's so many issues to be discussed. I think, for us, so there is the tobacco, the treaty on tobacco and cigarettes, and the civil society in those negotiations were able to keep the tobacco companies out of the negotiations. And there's a long story about how that happened and which country supported what, and we don't have the time, and I don't have all the data to get into it. But we've had precedents where a treaty has said we will not allow those who are contributing to the problem to be a part of the negotiations, because they will obviously try to undermine the outcomes of the negotiation. And I think that's a precedence we need to invoke a lot more in the plastics treaty. And I know we've, as civil society, we've raised it, we've done it, but possibly we need to do it a little more, and a little more lobbying as well around this. Now, the fact is that even in INC1, we had Exxon, we have Total Energies, we have Coca-Cola, Unilever, Nestle. So you have, it's if you look at industry, it's not just FMCGs, and these oil majors that we're talking of are not just countries. They are companies. They are companies like Exxon, Total, Reliance. All of these who are minting money based on fossil fuel. So they are very much present in the treaty space. Not only are they present as individuals, they are there as a business coalition, which almost seems to be getting recognition like some kind of a major group. Which is also in its own way a problem. Apart from that, they also have their own research organizations, their own registered not-for-profit organizations who are also there, right? Then, apart from that, for example, we know that in Malaysia's delegation which came, there were 2 people at least from the industry who were part of the delegations, right? So look at the number of spaces. They come in as observers. Those 190 out of 390 observers are industry. They come in as part of the large delegations, who are there. They also then will fly. We all know from the UNFCCC experience how they spend the money in putting people up in fancy rooms and in, flying them across the globe to bring them to the government also. So there's a lot of money also that gets, spent. Now, what happens is that, for example, I can give you one, I can't say too much, but in one of the contact groups, we found that when it came time to observer statements, there seemed to be some kind of, some kind of a stonewalling of certain voices. There were several mics which had been, many people had asked for the floor, but those who got it, if you look at a pattern, those, or rather who didn't get it, were the indigenous people, or from the civil society. And while at least 2 or 3 people from the industry were given the mic. So we then, it might seem like a conspiracy theory, what I'm saying, but we don't, this is the evidence we have. There is no paper trail of their influence. There's no paper trail which says where did they meet and how they, lobbied for their positions to be in. So we can't obviously give evidence, but then you see it in the submissions. You see it in who's given the mic, who's privileged over the others, who's in a delegation, who's not. How many countries have scientists who are not affiliated with either the government or the industry as part of their delegations? How many delegations have social science researchers who look at impacts on communities and on the environment and climate as part of the delegations, again, who are independent, who are not part of the government or part of the industry? And you find very few delegations with such kind of membership. So this is a very serious problem. And just pointing to, like, for example, Saudi Arabia's opening statement, right, in this INC, in the opening plenary, they said that we welcome upstream measures like product design. This is, and you look at the business coalition's pre-INC 1 statement. This is exactly what is written there. We welcome upstream measures, which is product design. So then you undermine upstream. Upstream has already found it's been difficult for even upstream to find voice, even in the civil society space. To be very honest, it's all about, because for all of us, we started looking at plastics as a litter problem. And then we went up slowly, so all of us have discovered the upstream by and by, and it's also trickier. It's more difficult. Like everyone, even, Sadhrup or Juliet said that, bans are still okay, SUPs are still okay, but getting petrochemical to stop, getting oil extraction to stop is so much more difficult because of the kind of powers, that they have. So it becomes very, very difficult then to, take them on. Even on this question of just transition, there is this obligation 10 in the elements paper, which is about existing plastic pollution. And it only talks about the existing plastic pollution, which is in the marine or in the urban space. Even there, existing pollution does not talk about, the existing petrochemical industry and the pollution that's being caused by the existing petrochemical industry. So you see how throughout the elements paper, it's so you find instances where, again, this downstream focus is there, even after 514 resolution talking about life cycle, even with the obligations 1, 2, and 3 existing, which is about chemicals, polymers, and additives. Still, when we look at existing pollution, we forget that there is an existing petrochemical industry. There is an existing plastic producing, industry, which is also part of the, of the pollution. And I think this is deliberately kept that way, because I know we're saying SUPs are low hanging fruit. I wonder if they are, because if it's not for the SUPs, how will Total Energies and how will Saudi Aramco and how will Reliance and how will all these companies survive? If we actually bring it down to only to essential plastics, they'll have to actually lose out on their profits. So maybe the SUP struggle is not as easy as we possibly, think it to be, because they're just all over the place. And it's so difficult to put your finger in, there's no balance sheet which says we gave this much money to the government. So it's so difficult to, prove it. Yeah, I know I'm taking a little time, but yeah, so I think this conflict of interest is very tricky. It is difficult to prove with evidence, and we are such evidence-based people. But we'll have to do conjecture, like what I'm saying, and not think it to be a conspiracy theory. And we'll have to put a lot more, pressure on member states to say that keep the polluters out. You can't have the polluters in. Already they have infiltrated the governments with their money in the respective countries. They can't infiltrate this space also and undermine what's going on. And if we want that voting, we'll have to keep the polluters out. Otherwise, the voting is going to be so much more difficult to get. Yeah, I'm sorry, I get very emotional about this issue. So I got carried away.
I can understand. Well, Siddharth, I think, can we just bring in Harshad to kind of quickly respond on the just transition before we close? Sid, you're on mute.
Yeah, we have Harshad here. So Harshad, although he says that Juliet and Satyarupa and Swati have covered most of it, but Harshad, we would definitely want to hear something from you as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just hoping to get a quick update in the webinar rather than read all the writings that are being shared everywhere. I think what Juliet said has kind of put me in a confused state, because my idea of our idea of just transition is the same definition as what Satyarupa had said, and that seemed like a good solid foundation to work on and to build alliances across the world with other waste picker groups and indigenous communities and communities around landfills and waste to energy plants to talk about just transition. But if that word and that definition can potentially be co-opted by the industry across the globe, that puts everything that we say in a suspicious framework, where one is trying to say that we want to protect livelihoods. One could end up making enemies of member states who would otherwise be in favor of labor, saying that actually you're trying to protect the plastic industry. And that has been a big fear for waste picker communities across the board, of getting co-opted by either side of the argument, one that pushes for a total ban on production and one that pushes for an expansion of it. I think the question for us really boils down to representation, whether we are able to put forth the points of the informal sector across the globe without really saying that we want more plastics to exist, or we want, or that we think recycling is the ultimate answer to managing plastics and other types of materials across the globe. We want to find the middle path where we're able to reduce production, promote good recycling, which means a lot of infrastructure and investment, preserve the existing livelihoods, look at how reuse as a structure can actually be merged with the current logistic system of recycling, so on and so forth. I really don't have too much to add. I think I'm taken a little by surprise for having to speak. But the one learning and takeaway for me is definitely that co-opting, which was always a fear, is now baked into the conversation. And so I think waste picker communities and informal sector participants, and even those on the left and right of the argument, you can choose which side you choose to be, what is left and what is right. We'll have to negotiate and sometimes disagree and agree to disagree with the viewpoints of, let's say, someone at the BFFP side, someone on the SEAL side, someone on Gaia side, and someone on the Indian government and Saudi Arabia side. Sorry for clubbing them together, but I think that's how things are looking at right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Harshad. For the participants, Harshad Vade is the director of Swachh. So Swachh happens to be the largest cooperative of waste pickers in India, which is in the city of Pune. And this cooperative has more than 4,000 members. And they have an institutional partnership. So they have basically, they are basically given the responsibility of door-to-door collection of waste from about 850,000 properties in Pune, which is about 70% of Pune's kind of sources in terms of waste. So and it's a fascinating model. So that's why basically Harshad's pitch on just transition makes all the more sense. So I just felt like introducing Harshad to all the participants so that we can understand like what is the perspective that he was actually bringing in. So we have already exhausted the time and we have overshot by about 15 minutes. But it has been a fascinating discussion, and thanks to all the panelists from the bottom of my heart. Thanks to Siddharth for bringing out the briefing paper and working on an average 18 hours a day for the since last Monday till yesterday. And thanks to my colleagues back in India, Soparna Banerjee, our Senior Director for Outreach and Communications, my colleague Sukanya, who has been at the back end, but she has been doing a fantastic job to keep everything moving nicely. Thanks to our entire unit who have made this event possible. Thanks to all the participants for your patience, and my deepest apologies for not being able to take too many questions. But through the registration process, we have your coordinates, email IDs, and phone calls. I promise once we get back to India, we will take all the questions, put them together in one Word document, answer them, and have them mailed to all of you. And that's you have my word on this. So thank you all again for joining in this wonderful conversation. And this will, however, continue, because between now and the next INC in Nairobi, the dates are not disclosed yet, but it will be happening sometime in November 2023. And in between, there will be intersessional work, and we will coming back with more updates, and we'll keep you all posted about what's happening in the INC going forward. Sid, any quick word from you, and then we can close.
No, nothing from my side. Just thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Juliet, although I think she dropped off. She had some other commitments, but thank you so much, Satyarupa. Thank you, Swati, and thank you, Harshad, for that special appearance. I know that you were clearly not prepared for it. Sorry to put you in such a situation, but we just wanted to hear from you. And thank you definitely to all the participants who took out the time to kind of understand about this issue. We feel that the more number of people that are aware about this issue, the more we talk about it, the more our media reports about it. I think all of us have to be together in this journey, so that it is a lot more easier for each one of us. So that's it from my side. Atin, over to you. You can.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.